to H, report from Student Council representative.
Thank you. At John Trumbull Primary School, teachers over the past 2 weeks have been busy with goal-setting conferences, documenting projected success for students and keeping parents updated throughout their child's progress, with the goal being to keep this communication constant for the entire school year. The first School Spirit Day was held, which was called Mismatch Day, and it raised over $200. All this money will be donated to Project Graduation at Watertown High School. At Polk Elementary School, students have been discussing the book WCO in small groups led by Watertown High School students. The fun run raised a projected triple-digit amount, which will go towards a new Chromebook cart. At Judson Elementary School, a new school nurse was welcomed. She is named Jessica Bolin, and a PTO meeting was held last week, with the Judson School Monster Mash being held on Friday, October 21st from 6 to 8. At Swift Middle School, 8th graders were visited by representatives from Nonawag and Kaner Tech, allowing them to learn about both schools. Clubs are also up and running, including Student Council's Go Pink Day, the newspaper, the garden, and the woodshop, Lego, and robotics clubs. And finally, at Watertown High School, our college fair on October 20th was a huge success, with over 80 post-secondary representatives on hand for students to meet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item I, discussion regarding the 2017 Board of Education meeting dates. I believe board members all received in their packet a copy of the meeting dates proposed through January through December of 2017. As always, the meetings are held here at 7:30 p.m. on the second and fourth Monday of each month, except when a holiday falls on a Monday, and then it's held on the Tuesday. We have scheduled only one meeting for July, August, and December. Do board members have any questions? Okay. Moving on to item J, presentation. We are thrilled to have State Representative Eric Berthel and State Senator Rob Kane with us this evening to provide a legislative update for the 2016 session and to discuss issues related to the school system and the Board of Education. Mr. Kane?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I hate to break up all the camaraderie we had tonight and all the fun and snacks and everyone's, having a good time, because I serve as the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, and which of course is our budget writing committee. And I'd like to say that things are going well, but I'm afraid that's not the case. I think the biggest thing, and I think Representative Berthel and I decided that he serves on the Education Committee. He could talk about legislation and bills that come out of that committee. I serve, as I mentioned, on the Appropriations Committee, so my forte is the budget. What we've just seen in fiscal year 16, which ended on June 30th, was the budget ended in deficit. And the rainy day fund was used to offset that budget loss. Fiscal year 17, you may have read the papers recently about so much debate of what the real number is, but in fact, those members on our side of the aisle are holding a hearing tomorrow, Wednesday, with the Office of Fiscal Analysis, which is our nonpartisan budget office, in regards to what the true number is. If you look back in the papers in August, there was a talk of a $120 million deficit, and then all of a sudden there was a $200,000 surplus, and then about a month ago was a $133 million deficit, and then just the other day the administration came out and said it's a $7 million deficit. So from our side of the aisle, our perspective is, well, what's the real number? I mean, you and I could not run our House budgets that way, let alone a $20 billion budget for the state of Connecticut. So the Office of Fiscal Analysis, as I mentioned, is a nonpartisan budget office, and their latest figure is $133 million. So that would be fiscal year 17. The news gets worse as fiscal year 18, 19, and 20, which are certainly not what we've dealt with just yet, but are approaching. They are in the billions of dollars. So we're looking at $1 billion deficit in 18, $1 billion deficit in 19, and so forth. And I think there's a lot of things that take place in regards to that, but certainly the revenues continue to decline, whether you talk about sales tax revenues, corporate tax revenues, and most importantly, income tax revenues. The governor's own budget address that he gives once a year stated that our high-wage earners are leaving the state of Connecticut and being replaced by lower-wage earners, and unfortunately, that doesn't add up. So that's a big issue. What I will say, if I'll shift gears just a little bit and talk about the near future, you may have heard of the Moore Commission, which was put together by the Speaker of the House, Brendan Sharkey, and this commission is not unlike the room we're sitting in here today, with advocates as well as local representation, as well as members from Hartford, came together and looked for ways to find efficiencies and for regionalization and savings and that kind of thing. There was a $20 million line item in the budget for those efficiencies, but they never defined them. So now beware that the governor may be taking that lapse after the election, and you could have another $20 million cut coming from municipal aid. Municipal aid has been cut multiple times over the last 2 years, and unfortunately, we may see that yet again after November 8th. So just be mindful of that. As far as ECS, the educational cost sharing grants, which we rely upon in the state of Connecticut, there was a court ruling that you may have seen where Judge Mookwasher, I think his name is, if I'm pronouncing it correct, came out and said that the formula that was created, the ECS, Educational Cost Sharing Formula, that was created years ago, is not adhered to. What takes place is at the end of the budget season, which is goes along with the regular session, the leaders get together in a room, and in order to get the proper votes on the budget that they need, will differ out monies. So you'll find there is a huge inequity in the way the funding stream is maintained, and a lot of it, unfortunately, is based on politics. And this is not me saying this. This came from a court ruling. Clearly stated that fiscal year 16 and 17 were politically driven. So if you're a leader, whether it be the committees that we speak of or of your caucus, you tend to be able to bring home monies to your district because of that leadership role. And it was clearly stated in the court ruling. If you have an opportunity, I would check it out. It's worth a read. I don't want you to go through the hundreds of pages that were there, but certainly there's some information that you could use. So I think that's one of the key things that needs to be changed is in the educational cost sharing. I think we did okay over this last budget. Tom maybe or the superintendent can speak to that. I think we did okay on the last budget. It wasn't as bad as we expected, I guess, is the new norm. When you talk about educational cost sharing, but we can certainly do far better because it's based on many factors that unfortunately are not being used right now. But let's face it, when we have difficulties passing budgets, and I know, Tom, you mentioned in your speech about how many referendums may have failed. When you talk about the taxpayer in our own hometown, they really have no input on the federal budget, right? And they have very little input on the state budget. So the one place they can feel that, I'm not going to take it anymore is at the local level. And that's unfortunate because I think that the local level, that is where government affects us most, right? That's our schools, that's our police, our fire, our parks, our roads, all the things that we deal with on a daily basis. So I think it's very important that we maintain the proper funding on the local level because that's where government affects people so greatly. So I think that's one of the things that needs to be fixed. As we go into session, I think there will be a conversation on both sides of the aisle because there are districts for our caucus members that do well compared to some caucus members on the other side. But I think what needs to be truly fixed is the politics of it, and that came down in the court ruling, and it just shows that if you're in a leadership position, you get to bring home the proverbial bacon. I hate to be the skunk at the garden party. I tend to be when I speak in locally in my district and elsewhere, but it is a dire situation. I'm not going to mince words. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We do have a fiscal crisis in front of us, and it's going to take a lot to pull ourselves out of it. But I think hate to say, to give you a wait-and-see mentality, but once we go back into session come January, I think many more difficult decisions will need to be made. I'll certainly take any questions that you have.
Rob, how's the debt service affecting our budget? Because I know it's got to be absolutely killing us.
Well, that's a great question, Tom, and I also serve on a committee that was put together called the Spending Cap Commission. And if not to belabor it, but just to give you a brief history, in 1991, when the income tax was first instituted by the legislature, a deal was made that they would put that along with a spending cap. They put it, 80% of the population went out and voted. It was on a referendum that November. 80% of the population voted in favor of it. It was never put into work. We have a statutory cap, but no true spending cap. And one of the things that has come up is the debt service. And the problem is, over the last 6 years, we've seen increased bonding on our state credit card. And part of that has to be appropriated is the debt service. So when we're paying on that loan, we need to make those interest payments all the time. So that's a huge issue because whether that will stay under the confines of the spending cap or be moved out. This administration over the last couple of years has steadily moved appropriations, expenses out from within that spending cap in order to spend in other areas. And that is what's causing the problem that we're seeing. So we have been working, I think, for the most part, on a bipartisan way to come up with a recommendation to the entire legislative body in regards to what that cap should look like. But one of those problem areas is our indebtedness, and then that needs to be fixed. But that's a huge burden on our current budget, yes.
Are we almost approaching junk bond status?
No.
I mean, with all the
Moody's did lower our rating recently.
It did get lowered.
It did get lowered. I don't know if it's AA3 or somewhere in there. But no, I think that our pension obligations are rather large. Our unfunded liabilities are also, within that same realm. It's in the billions of dollars. But, when you have companies like GE leaving, unfortunately, you can't replace them with, I don't want to mention any names. But long story short, it is a serious situation. But I think a long-term structural changes need to take place in order for us to pull ourselves out of it.
A quick question on the ECS ruling. Was there a time limit that they were given by the judge to reformulate, so to speak?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it's like, I want to say March or April of this upcoming year. Okay. And it's just far too aggressive a timeline for that to occur. So as you also may know, the Attorney General is actually fighting the ruling in the courts. So this could get dragged on for a while. But I think the key in this is taking those points that were made in the ruling in regards to the politics versus policy, and then sticking with a formula that works and can be fair and equitable to 169 towns.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Senator Kane? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you having me this evening, and hopefully I'll bring better news next time I come.
I will say, before we move on to Representative Berthel, that you are always very gracious with your time. Anytime we have any questions for you,
Of course.
you and your office are very forthcoming with information. I know Dr. Katamoa and myself have both personally reached out, so I just want to thank you for that, and also for your time this evening. We look forward to your visit again next year, if not sooner.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Berthel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the one additional comment that I'd like to make with respect to the financial situation and what Senator Kane spoke about is, we talk about needing structural changes, and really what we're talking about is changing policy, okay, and changing the way that the state of Connecticut conducts business. One of the most recent, I'll say, became a high-profile example that affects education was when about 2 weeks ago, Ben Barnes, who of course we know is the governor's policy chief, released that we were again going to be looking at a deficit, and there was some concern about the timing on all of that. But he noted in his release that the governor had asked through Mr. Barnes for departments to do a 10% reduction in spending. Okay? And the first thing that the State Department of Education did, that the commissioner there did, said, well, there's a really easy way to fill that hole. Okay? And the commissioner was not saying that this was the solution, but one of the solutions that was proposed was to potentially close 2 technical high schools. Now, when you're in a state where you have a dwindling workforce, when you have companies like GE that look to hire skilled labor to work in their factories, how can you possibly have a commissioner that's appointed by a governor? Okay? And I'm not trying to make this political. I'm just stating what I believe to be facts right now. Okay? How can you have a commissioner that's appointed by a governor make a recommendation to close technical high schools? Technical high schools, very much like what we try to do here in Watertown, try to train students that are coming out of high school for the future. Okay? And technical high schools train for specific jobs. Dr. Carnamola, if I'm not mistaken, you worked in the state technical high school system prior to your employment with us. So it seems so not only disingenuous, but almost egregious that a commissioner of a department would make a statement like that and say, well, here's an easy solution. Here's 10%. There you go. With no regard for how that affects the future of our state. And it's not policy. It's kind of like that ready, shoot, aim mentality. That you go into a battle and you just put your dukes up and go. There's no strategy to it, and it's not policy. It's not policy, and that's when we talk about needing structural changes to the way that we're doing business. That's what it comes down to, where people have the intelligence that are running these departments to sit down and say what really makes sense and what is the effect today, what's the effect 5 years from now, what's the long-term effect on the overall well-being of our state. When people are appointed to these roles and people are elected to offices, you don't serve for this moment in time. You're given the privilege and you're given the responsibility of protecting the people that you serve, whether you're an elected or an appointed official. And that's what I see as I finish my first 2 years in the State House. That's what I see as being really the most difficult problem for us to overcome in our state right now. It really is, and it translates into very succinctly what Senator Kane just spoke to in terms of these ridiculous and truly critical financial straits and dire straits that we're in right now. So that's kind of my piece. I sit on finance, revenue, and bonding. So Senator Kane, they figure out where the money's going to go, and finance, revenue, and bonding figures out where we're going to get the money to send back to appropriations so they can spend it. And it's a very, very difficult and really a difficult and horrible situation to be in at times when we look at what's being done to our future. So with that, the Education Committee is one of the other committees I sit on along with Public Health. And the Education Committee this year, Public Education, it's not called Public Education, but it is the Education Committee, really had a rather quiet year and a short session. There were, if my math was correct this afternoon, there were 45 bills that were voted out of committee. There were 16 bills that were voted on in the chambers. 4 or 5 of those 16 bills dealt with something that the legislature does every session, which is to make technical adjustments to bills. They update dates for things. They change dates for reporting requirements, things that legally have to be changed. So they're really no-brainer kind of bills. They come out to the floor and they're passed. I would say that, in my humble opinion, there were three bills that I think were of the largest interest and concern this year. Two of them dealt with protecting students. One of them had to do with the protection of privacy, student privacy and data as it is transversing through our various systems and back and forth through state servers and federal government servers. I will not get into the nitty-gritty of that. I have a copy of the bill that I'm happy to leave, and you guys can, I know you don't ever get enough paper every week to read and plow through, so I'm happy to leave you with a copy of that bill, or you can access it electronically. A second bill that was of interest also protected students. It has to do with expanded guidelines for Board of Education staffs who are being hired, and looking at background checks and digging a little deeper depending upon what type of role that future employee may have with students in any given school system. And then finally, there was a bill that changed requirements for teachers who are seeking certification endorsement as a remedial reading, remedial language arts, or reading consultant, that very specifically dealt with a new standard that these teachers must adhere to regarding intervention and work with students with dyslexia. Okay? And it was a very, the bill was not terribly deep in terms of its language, but what it set out to accomplish was very important, because I think it allows school boards of education to ensure that if you are making the investment in a reading specialist, a remedial reading specialist, that this individual has a very specific skill with standards prescribed by the State Department of Education for dealing with those students. Dyslexia is a very serious issue that many of our students deal with, and it's one that in some school systems gets overlooked because it's not something that is, I guess, as visible as perhaps some other issue that a student may be dealing with. But basically, that was, in a short session, we don't see a whole lot of necessarily highly innovative or really interesting bills that come out because the time frame is so short, and there's a battle that ensues for time on the calendar, on the agenda for any given day when we're in session. But if any of you have any bills that you saw this year that you would like to talk about, please, let me know now. If you have that information now, I'll try to answer your questions. If not, then certainly I think you all know how to get in touch with me. But
I think I've spoken to you multiple times.
we have, yeah, we have.
In regards to certain bills, and as I thank Senator Kane, thank you very much for your assistance and your
My
input.
pleasure.
And also, one thing that strikes me about your work with the Board of Education and how that translates into you as a state representative is that you do call us and sort of ask us what we think about certain things that are coming up on the Education Committee and in the State House, and I appreciate that very much. And
Well, thanks, and I don't mind sharing. I actually don't remember what the topic was, but I do remember feverishly texting both you and Dr. Carnamola as a bill that had come out of committee that I don't remember if I had supported out of committee or not, but it was on the floor. It was, and maybe you guys initiated the dialogue. I don't remember, but thank you for that, because we live in this age of instant technology and communication. And it was helpful for me as one vote amongst 151 that day to be able to make an even more educated decision about how I was either going to. Do either of you remember what it was? I don't, but maybe it's not important. I don't know, but it was great to have that, and I thank you for.
The subject was controversial, so we'll just.
Yeah, subject was controversial. We'll leave it at that. But it was. It is good to have that, and there are. You should take some comfort in knowing that, the Education Committee is one of the larger committees, one of the larger joint committees of the General Assembly, and the overwhelming majority of the legislators that sit on that committee have either prior teaching or prior Board of Education or prior administrative experience. So it's not a room full of people that just, drew a name out of a hat and said, "Ooh, education, I'm going to go on that committee." We're all on that committee. We don't always agree, obviously, on everything, but we're all on that committee because we choose to be there. And that's very helpful, because we are making decisions that truly impact what goes on here, and ultimately what all of you are are responsible for ultimately putting down. So, and no more unfunded mandates. That's important. So, thank you, Mrs. Crotty, for the opportunity to speak tonight. I appreciate that. And
Thank you for coming and accepting the invitation once again.
Sure,
Do any
thanks.
board members have any questions for Representative Berthel? Mr. Lambert?
Just a quick one.
Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the latest craze up there at the State House is maybe by the governor, is to lower graduation requirements. And at the same time, they're finding out, yay, they're graduating, the numbers are up. And then they go into school, to college, they have to take remedial classes in order to just get along as a freshman. Where is that balance?
Well, you know, the issue of lowering standards has been something that's been going on in.
I think we want to raise standards.
You would think you would want to, and part of the issue, Tom, is that Connecticut still statistically, when you look at how Connecticut compares to states across the country, we still have this huge learning gap between communities. Well, actually, not so much communities like Watertown, because Watertown kind of is in the middle of that gap, if I'm not mistaken. But you have our big cities where you have graduation rates that are not good at all, and then you do have communities like ours where we've improved our graduation rate over the last few years. But I guess my answer would be that it's a response to trying to close that gap between what's going on in the big cities and what's going on in the small towns. And I'm not sure that that's the right approach. We should be looking to make our graduates, our high school graduates, be smarter and more well prepared. Now, an argument might be from someone who's on a board of education or representing one of those big cities in Connecticut that there isn't enough money to properly assure that their students can meet the same standards that we do here in Watertown or other school districts that are in the same DRG as us, let's say. And then you go and look at what's spent in big cities compared to what we spend. And you go, well, wait a minute, there isn't enough money, but you spend $3,000 or $4,000 a year per student more than we do. And for every dollar that your city sends to Hartford, you're getting $3 back, and we're getting whatever our return is here in Watertown, but not nearly that much. So I don't know that I have an answer directly in terms of what we do to fix it, but it's certainly an issue that needs to be addressed. We should not be lowering standards for getting kids just to get them through the system and out, because it just adds to the problem of no employment and underemployment. It doesn't help anybody.
Thank you.
So, you're welcome.
Mr. Makowski?
Thank you. A hot topic, especially amongst parents, is always Common Core. So I'm curious, what conversations, if any, are being had in Hartford around this area?
Well, Common Core. I can go back in time and remind you how I felt about Common Core. I sat over there when it all came down and was quite literally jammed down our throats. Common Core came from the federal government, so the efforts. Connecticut had an option, I guess, ultimately to not abide. There's a number of states who chose not to implement Common Core, but I think the issue right now for more of the focus right now is trying to figure out whether or not, as part of Common Core, our standardized testing is working and whether it's effective. I was very happy to receive scores in the mail the other day for my two children who are in our schools, and I'm not sure I know how to read what I received, and despite Dr. Parlato's efforts, I think, to provide a nice letter of explanation. I don't know if she's still here, but I think that there's a whole bunch of work that still has to be done, Rob, with respect to that. This year there was not a whole lot of appetite for anything to do with Common Core, but and depending on who you speak to in the district, whether it's a teacher, an administrator, you can get a dozen different views on whether it's working or not. So I don't know if that's a
The answer with not much appetite for it, you know, bigger fish to fry. And so I was just curious.
Any other questions?
I have one, and it's kind of a silly one. It goes back to our Parents' Day
Yeah,
C days,
way back
remember?
when, sure, I do. It's when
Rem-
we met, Cheryl, that's right.
That's right, it is. And you were on my team. Remember we played that game? And we split up the groups, and we each had like our own district. Do you remember that game?
I think so.
And, you know, here we are, you know, implementing things for our district, and then the outcomes that we had were completely different than what we were expecting. Are you finding that it's like that in the real world up in Hartford?
Well-
It's probably, I already know the answer probably, but are you finding that our experience with the Parent C, where we got to see how, you know, you think it's gonna go one way, but it goes another way, or a completely different way that you would never even have expected? Are you finding that it's like that, you know, in the real world?
Let me answer your question in kind of a slightly different way, and I'll be brief. I know we're trying to, it's coming up on 9 o'clock here, but here's what I can tell you is that my first 2 years in Hartford were nothing like I expected them to be. I never expected the role that I'm in today to be as frustrating as it would be, but the frustration is actually a motivator. You know, when you're trying to learn how to tie your shoes and you finally, you know, you tie them in knots and tie them in knots and tie them in knots, and finally you get it right. Okay? You stay motivated to get that knot done the right way. For the same reasons that I served on this board and chose to serve on the board, Tom, not very different for the reasons why you've been 10 years here because of your granddaughter. It's very different than what I expected, okay? And you have to learn how to navigate. You have to learn how to get things done. Senator Kane has been a remarkable source of guidance and counsel and a true mentor as well in that process. But what we lived back then was I think probably very real in that class 6 years ago. So, but thanks for the question. It's good to be able to provide that perspective. So,
It was a great experience for both of us.
so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scrotty.
Thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you again. You're welcome
Likewise.
to stay with us this evening.
I'll stay
but
for a few minutes.
We
Sure,
won't
why
take it
not? Yeah.
personally if you
Yeah.
don't. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for letting me be here tonight.
Of course. We come to item K on the agenda, our first round of public participation. Do any members of the public wish to address the board this evening? Please state your name and street address. And speak really close to the microphone.
Hello. Lisa Posesta, 40 Hubble Avenue. I just wanted to, on behalf of the entire Swift PTSO, we would like to present you with this bottle, and it says, "The Swift PTSO celebrates Thomas Lambert on 10 years of service on the Board of Education. The seeds that you have sown will forever flourish." I hope that you realize how true these words really are. Your gift to our children is immeasurable, and we will be eternally grateful. So we just wanted to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for everything that you do for our kids. And I know this is from the Swift one, but for Polk as well, because you were always there for us when we were there. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other members of the public wish to address the board this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item L, our first quarter budget summary. Dr. Cardamola or Mrs. Brown?
I'll just start briefly with, again, this is the first for this school year. As you know, the fiscal year ended June 30th for us, but operations still carry on through the summer, and reconciling of previous year's budget and the auditing process and so forth, which is actually still taking place. That said, we wanted to, again, bring to the board at the end of quarter one for this fiscal year, 2016-2017, where we are in terms of expenditures, and also to begin to project out the year. As such, Mrs. Brown put this together for us. We sent this home, the budget status report. I think we all have a copy in front of us. And I asked Mrs. Brown to first go through and point out some areas that she thought were notable for explanations and to keep us all on the same page about allocations and our projected year-end variances, if there are any. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Brown to first go through that, and then certainly if we have questions, we will answer those for you as well tonight. Mrs. Brown.
Thank you. Well, good evening. As Dr. Carnamola said, you were all provided with the first quarter budget report in your packet, and you'll see that overall, by and large, our financial outlook is very good as we move into the second quarter of the year. The following are some items that I noted and would like to discuss briefly. In object number 112, which is our non-certified salary line, you'll notice that the expenditures appear to be over for quarter one by about $16,412. This is due to, we had one paraprofessional who's actually, her salary is paid for by the IDEA Special Education Grant, but her salary was encumbered under the general fund. That has since been corrected, but at the time of this report, that's that one person. Moving down a couple of lines to object number 120, the substitute salaries. Our quarter one spending is a little bit less than last year's. Last year in quarter one, I looked up, we spent $27,359. And I've made a note of this so that I can adjust future Q1 or quarter one forecasts. We tend to have very good attendance across the board during the first start of the school year. Historically, we've seen that as we move into the second half of the year, cold and flu season, or the year gets on, we do experience more absences. We do have some anticipated long-term absences coming with some families that are growing here in Watertown, and we also unfortunately see some ongoing long-term illnesses in our personnel, so we do anticipate that we are going to need most or all of that substitute funding. Down a little bit more to object number 200, employee benefits. I did attend a meeting last month with the town finance director and representatives from Anthem. And they've advised us that overall, between the town employees and the Board of Education employees, we have about 19 catastrophic claims this year. 13 of those appear to be situations that there's going to be ongoing treatments. And because we're a self-insuring entity, the town offices requested that we forward over our October portion. So you'll see that as you follow that line through, there's a negative $414,000 number. That's our share of the health benefits paid a month early. Moving down just a little bit more to object number 310, professional and technical services, and also 560, the tuition line. These numbers also appear low for Q1, but we have received invoices after the date of this report that actually happened in quarter one. And if you'll recall, these are two of the three areas where we allocate the excess cost grant, the special education grant, not the ECS education cross sharing, but the special education excess funds. About 3/4 of the funding that we receive for those purposes in the state go to these two areas. So although the numbers appear low for quarter one, we're going to use every single penny and then some for those two areas. Moving down to pupil transportation, you'll notice spending in transportation exceeds what I had forecasted for quarter one. This year, we elected to prepay for diesel fuel at the consortium price of $2.02 per gallon, which is a really great price. So this number actually includes all of the fuel costs for student transportation for our buses this year. So that's in with that quarter one number, that elevated it. I will also make an adjustment to this for future forecasts when I see that we've gone ahead and prepaid the fuel. And then lastly, 613, which is custodial supplies. As you all know, we're continually reviewing year to year to ensure the accuracy of not only these projections, but our overall budget allocations. So I went back and looked at what happened during quarter one this year, and our spending in quarter one at this time last year was $66,942. So that's actually come down to 61,070. Traditionally, we do some more heavy-duty cleaning over the summertime months, things like the floor stripping and the special mops and buffers that go on that machine and equipment that do the floors. And we also order the day-to-day supplies over the summertime that we're going to use into the year. So I see a larger number in quarter one. I did speak and confer with the facilities manager, and we do expect that we're on target in this area. That was what I had for the report, and if you have additional questions there, I'm happy to answer them for you.
Before I open it up to any questions, is there anything that you'd like to discuss, Dr. Cardamone?
Just to go back and speak a little bit more to the 200 line, the employee benefits. And obviously, as Mrs. Brown said, this is our insurance. And we still expect to come in at the same dollar amount over the course of the year, even though we have, as Mrs. Brown said, prepaid this 414. It's actually not 414 that we prepaid, it's the October payment alone. So this, in other words, this 414,000 is from July 1st now through October, but we paid it in advance of October, so it throws off the quarter one numbers, which would have ended on September 30th. Clearly, we are maintaining, our open communication relationship with the town, particularly the town manager and the finance director, trying to work closely with them. And this was something that was decided at this meeting as a way to ensure that on both sides, something that was unforeseen was covered immediately, not expecting it to throw our budget off for the rest of the entire year. I don't have a crystal ball, of course, and I can't absolutely guarantee that nothing else will come of these health claims. But the good news is that we have stop-loss coverage, which in years past, when we had a bigger budgetary impact, was not in place at the level that it is. So we are still, in the current year we're living in good shape from an insurance standpoint. But I believe we certainly will be talking about changes for next year, because like whether we're self-insured or not, our premiums will more than likely rise for the coming year as a result of the claims for this year. So that's already on the horizon. We won't have that number. As you know, we don't get that number until sometimes even the end of January, depending on how long it's taking Anthem to put this together. But I expect us to get through this year with what was budgeted on both the town and the board side, but that we will be looking at an increase to manage for the coming budget year.
Thank you for that explanation. Do board members have any questions for either Dr. Cardamone or Mrs. Brown? Mr. Lambert?
Thank you, Mrs. Crotty. You answered most of my questions already, Mrs. Brown, so good job. Object Code 560, tuition. You didn't mention that in your little thing yet, did you?
I did, we had invoicing come in from the special education department, and they will forward those invoices to us, and as soon as they come in, they are processed. And at the time of this report, which was run the first week of October through 9/30, we've since received invoices, and those numbers look quite different now.
Yeah,
So
okay.
the tuition line with the professional services, technical services, all of that, we will use every penny, plus excess cost grant funding from the state.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other board members have questions? Mr. Makowski?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. One point of clarification, in the grand totals, we have the annual budget at 41,071,791, and the projected as 41,016,056. Does that mean we're under budget for the year? Because the projected year-end variance shows that we're over budget.
It's projected under budget.
Okay.
Yep, we are projected under budget by 55,735.
So should the projected year-end variance column be, should that be a negative?
No, I
No,
think
or
I'm
is that-
showing
or is
it
it just-
exactly opposite as you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure I'm understanding the
Yeah.
graph. Okay, thank you. Great.
Since you brought that up, I'm sorry.
No,
May I?
it's just a quick quip. Of course, you're never gonna use $55,000 by the end of the year, right?
That's what,
That's
you
a
know,
little
that's what I was about to
contingency there.
comment on. Just to be clear, since we, we're bringing that out.
Yeah.
This is where right now we are projecting with no unforeseen issues.
Winter doesn't happen.
And when, and we do have, of course, we try to allocate the right amount of money for what the winter would cost and so forth, but I've said this in two previous years already sitting here, sometimes I forget, that it's a continual balancing of the checkbook, because no matter how much we project, there will be changes. We will be asking for line item transfers. There will be more overtime for snow removal or less overtime for snow removal, or God forbid, there'll be another issue with a generator, something. I mean, these are the kind of things that we can't foresee, and so to be perfectly honest, while we're going through this beginning part of the year, we are really holding tight on the purse strings, so to speak. We try to spend the least amount of the budget early on until we can get further in the year, in certain lines at least, and be more comfortable with saying, okay, we truly can spend all of the money that was allocated for, you name it. Field trips would be a good example. Something, of course, we don't want to take from our students, but if we came to a point in the year where we had some other catastrophe, equipment failure or something, we would have to look to drain other lines, because again, the last thing we ever want to do is return and say, we don't have enough money to run the district. So, right now, fingers crossed, we'd be happy to return money if it was left.
I asked the same question, I think, the last time we had a budget conversation,
did.
because it was my misunderstanding of the representation. I'm used to negatives when you're,
Got it.
so my
Right.
apologies.
Next time we won't let him.
No, that's okay. And
Rob, when I first started, I asked the same question because I'm used to it being the opposite as well, so everybody does it differently.
There's nothing to, I think it's good that we're able to provide that clarification, because this is the truth of how we live by the budget.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Brown. Thank you, Dr. Cardamula. Moving on to item M, the report from the board chair. You'll be happy to know that my speech on I just promoted you. My speech on Mr. Lambert was in lieu of my chair report this evening. Moving on to item N, committee reports, curriculum and instruction. Mrs. Rinaldi.
Yes, Mrs. Crotty, we have a curriculum and instruction meeting on October 25th at 6 o'clock, which is tomorrow at the Swift Library.
Thank you very much. Board members on that committee who have already responded, thank you. And those that are not on the committee that would like to attend, obviously are welcome. And please RSVP to Dr. Cardamola's office if you haven't already. Policy and Labor, Mr. Vicenzi.
No report.
Thank you very much. Budget and Finance, Mr. Lambert.
No report at this time.
And back to you with Facilities and Operations.
Also, no report.
Thank you. Mr. Murkowski, Governance and Community Engagement.
Real quick update. We're just looking to schedule a meeting to evaluate and discuss the mission of our committee, Governance and Community Engagement, in the near future.
Thank you. I look forward to that very much. Moving on to item O, Communications. Madam Secretary.
Yes, Madam Chair. We did receive correspondence from the Girl Scouts, and they said, Dear Dr. Carmola and members of the Board of Education, we wanted to thank you again for inviting us to present our Silver Award project to all of you. It was kind of you, and we appreciate your supportiveness of our idea. Also, thank you for the flowers and certificates that recognize our work toward the Buddy Benches. Olivia, Felicia, and Hannah.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilkin. For those of you who, I'm sure, none of us forget their presentation that evening, we asked them to present because they had a very special project for their Silver Award that directly affected our schools with the Buddy Bunches and bullying prevention and helping with loneliness and playtime at recess. So we're quite proud of those girls and appreciate the thank you note. Moving on to item P, action items. Consideration of the approval of the 2017 schedule of meeting dates for Watertown Board of Education. Is there a motion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that the board approve of the 2017 schedule of meeting dates as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Murkowski. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Moving on to item Q, future agenda items and board member comments. Do board members have any comments they wish to make at this time, or any suggested future agenda items? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our last round of public participation. Any members of the public wish to address the board this evening? Anybody back there? We're all set. Okay, moving on to item S. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yes, Madam Chair, I make a motion that we adjourn.
Thank you, Mrs. Rinaldi. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm assuming there's no discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We are adjourned. The time is 9:00.